So I think the title of the talk scares a lot of people because it said algorithms. Today's talk isn't really about algorithms, it's about testing. How many of you guys have done testing in software before? Okay, perfect. How many of you guys have had a computer that froze and then you're trying to troubleshoot why it's not working? Okay, perfect. Well, that's all part of testing, right? So the book that we're basing our talk on is called Cracking the Coding Interview. How many of you guys have seen that book before? So again, we'll be covering chapter 11 called testing. And the 4 things that we're going to be covering are testing a real-world object, testing a piece of software, testing a function, and troubleshooting questions. When we get to testing a function, I have some work on our whiteboard here. And then if anyone wants to volunteer to come do some work up here, keep that in mind. Okay, April?
Okay.
You're going to be voluntold. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start, okay? This, like always, is more of a conversation between developers rather than me teaching you anything because, as I said before, I don't know anything. Okay, we're going off the book. Okay, any questions before we start? Like what the Wi-Fi password is, or no? My favorite color, maybe? Wonderful. Okay.
Can I get your help at the end?
Sorry? Oh, yeah, of course. It'll be 50 bucks.
You said anything.
50 bucks.
Yeah,
So,
fair
no, it's not.
Where are the restrooms?
Restrooms right here. So
Okay, thank you.
here and right by Scott.
Thank you.
So testing. Testing is an important task for a software engineer. Testing problems usually fall under one of 4 categories. Okay? And the 4 categories are testing a real-world object, testing a piece of software, testing a function, and troubleshooting questions. So let me see what. Who's really good with PowerPoint? Somebody? Somebody save me. Please don't do that to me. Okay, so I'm having an issue. I have notes for these, and it doesn't want to show my notes.
Those done right there?
No, of course. Oh, that's why. Is it because I'm duplicating? Okay. I think I'm duplicating. Yeah, I'm duplicating. Oh, no, no, I need my notes. I don't know what I'm talking about. Perfect. Okay, here. So let's do this. We're going to forget whoever went through this.
I didn't see anything.
Perfect. Can you guys do me a favor and turn around and stare at those guys? They're late. Just shake your head at them.
Apparently winning hack day went to their heads.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it did.
Come in whenever.
We were in class.
They all do.
So everything's looking fine now. So not showing me. Categories. Okay, perfect. So, testing a real-world object. How many of you guys have ever come across a question that says, how do you test a pen? Okay, Andy. So, some interviewers ask questions like this, and these questions are geared to see what your thought process is like. So let's say I ask any of you guys, how would you test a pen? what would you tell me?
You stick it in your ear and see which one.
No, I would not hire you. So Andy, what would you say?
Use it.
Andy, we're trying to get you a job, not. So what would you? Okay, so think about it this way: they're asking you how do you test a pen, and they want to see where your thought process is, right? So how would you approach it?
I would see if you can write. Yeah.
Okay.
I've got it myself. If it's right, it's good.
Okay.
It's not good.
That's one approach, right? Okay. So here's our question: how would you test a paperclip? Okay. And here's how we would approach it. There's 5 steps. Oh, I thought this was a private message to me. I'm like, oh no. Okay. Sometimes we send gifts and they're not very good gifts.
They should be publicly displayed?
Yes, it should not be. Testing real world objects. So the steps are, who will use it, right? And why? So the pen might be used by a student or a teacher or a doctor. They might have different uses, right? The whole purpose of the pen is specific, but the user might be different, right? Second step, what are the use cases? Okay, all these steps, yeah, you're testing a real world object, but they do apply to software, right? What are the bounds of use? What are the limitations, right? Now, what are the stress and failure conditions? Okay, in terms of software, for example, how many users are going to be utilizing that piece of software? Is it going to be 1,000 users or 1,000,000 users? Now, step 5, how would you perform testing? Okay, so again, if you follow these steps, you're better positioned to ask questions, right, and provide the testing instead of writing on yourself like Andy would. Okay. In his defense, I think he just came from drinking, so. Tony told me. That's what he said. Here. He's not a spy, no. Oh no, come on. Testing a piece of software. So testing a piece of software is actually very similar to testing a real-world object. Just like I said, the major difference is that software testing generally places a greater emphasis on the details of performing testing. Okay? We're going to have a question towards the end of the presentation, and I'm going to ask you guys to do a simple test, but you have no tools. Okay? So make sure you guys are paying attention to what we're going to be talking about. And again, if you guys have any questions at any point, let me know. And then we can Google it together. Testing a piece of software. So software testing has 2 core aspects to it. Okay? There's manual versus automated testing, and there's black box testing versus white box testing. How many of you guys have ever done any sort of testing? Okay. Like specialized testing. So how many of you guys are developers? Okay. So normally, you should raise your hand. Yes, raise your hand. Oh my God. Okay, how about this? How many of you guys have fiddled with a little bit of code? And you're still worried. I'm like, I don't know if I should. Okay. You know what? Keep going. So here are the steps. Oh, come on. I still think my PowerPoint thing is broken. Okay. So you guys see these, right? There's 6 of them. So testing a piece of software. Here are the steps. First, are we doing black box or white box testing? Okay. Though this question can often be delayed to a later step, we can get it out of the way early on, right? Question, what is white box testing and black box testing? Let me go back.
You laughed at me when I said I
No, it's fine.
everything.
I knew you were getting there, so. Here, so manual versus automated testing. Do you guys know what that is? Okay, so automated tests. Okay. So in the ideal world, we might love to automate everything, but that's rarely feasible. For example, at Esri, we have a team that specializes in automating tests. So any application that we build, we have a team that builds tests to make sure that They catch anything we mess up on, okay? We don't like them at all, okay? Because we create features, and they always find something that's broken, okay? Always, even when we think that everything's fine, okay? The reason why they're very good at it is because we are working in like tunnel vision, so we just want to get it done, right? But they come at it, and they come at it from the angle of the user, of the end user, of the manager, whoever's going to use the product, right? So I think that's something that we don't do as developers. We don't come up with all those use cases and test cases. But yeah, so manual versus automated testing. Some things are simply much better with manual testing because some features are too qualitative for a computer to effectively examine, such as if content represents pornography. So let's say you're building something for kids, right? And it's scraping sites, random sites, and you give it parameters. But for some reason, there's a bug in the parameters you gave it, and you end up with content you're not supposed to be displaying, right? If you automate that test, the computer might not catch it. So you're going to have to do manual testing, right? Do we see the difference between that and the benefit of manual testing versus automated testing? Okay, perfect. So black box testing versus white box testing. This distinction refers to the degree of access we have into software. In black box testing, we're just given the software as is and need to test it. With white box testing, we have additional programmatic access. So we're able to touch the code, right? So I think a really good example is, let's say you work for Mozilla, and you are on the network panel team, but now they want you to test the profiling application, but you don't have access to that specific code base. But you do have access to utilize the actual piece of software, and they ask you, find any bugs, right? What kind of bugs do you think you can find? Anyone? So you have no access to the code, but you do have access to the user interface. So as a user, what kind of bugs can you find?
Display issues.
So display issues, right? Maybe user experience issues.
Right.
Input or output issues.
Right? But it doesn't mean you can go into the code and try to find bugs there, right? Or like performance issues or anything that's related to the code.
And you definitely won't be fixing it, though.
Of course. That is probably very hard. So do we get that? Black box versus white box testing? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I don't like this. So who from you was really good with PowerPoint? Was it you? Yeah, come on. I need help. Okay, so normally when I press here, this changes, and this is showing, but now it doesn't want to like switch. Should I just close it and try again? Then she's testing. She's troubleshooting. Yes. Yeah. Should we close it and turn it up? Yes, in your bank. Oh, okay. Here. Yeah. You probably do have a point. Let's close it. 100% to show them where the presentation is. It's all part of the plan, guys. It's all planned. So see, we have a journal channel right here. I'm going to download the presentation. I'm going to open it. Wherever it went, go to the desktop. I have it for sure there. I know you say it.
This would be a good time for you to talk about how we still have the IT position open.
IT position open. Oh man. Okay, let's see. Wonderful. Perfect.
You alright? You alright?
See, now I can act like I know what I'm talking about. That's wonderful. Okay. So testing the piece of software. Are we doing so? You got your answer, right, Scott?
Yeah.
About black box versus white box testing? Okay. Andy, prepare because I will start asking you questions. You're too close to the pizza. So step one, Are we doing black box or white box testing? So we need to figure that out, right? Do we have access to the code base, or do we have access only to the application itself? Okay. 2, who will use it? Who's going to be the end user, and why? What is the reason for them to use this application? Okay. 3, what are the use cases? Okay. Are they going to be using it from a car? Are they going to be using it from their phone, or from a, what are these?
Smartwatch?
Smartwatches. I don't have a smartwatch. Okay.
I don't either.
We're gonna play ping pong later. I'm gonna beat you this time. 4, what are the bounds of use? What are the limitations for the application? Okay. 5, what are the stress conditions and failure conditions? Okay. Very similar to the first list that we saw, right? And 6, what are the test cases? How would you perform the testing? Again, very similar to the first list that we saw about testing a real world object. Okay. So for step 2, who's going to use it and why? Software typically has one or more target users, and the features are designed with this in mind. So you can think about a website and how you have one view for desktop and one view for mobile applications, right? It's still the same user, but it's 2 different use cases, right? You use it on your phone, and then the other one uses it on the desktop, right? Do we understand that? Perfect. We don't think it's magic, right? So, for example, if you're asked to test software for parental controls on a web browser, your target users include both parents who are implementing the blocking and children who are recipients of blocking. You may also have guests, people who should neither be implementing nor receiving blocking. Okay? Does that make sense? Now keep in mind, I'm not pulling this out of my head. It's from the book. Okay? Perfect. Any questions? No questions?
I got you.
Okay. You just don't want to ask me questions or put me on the spot. I like that. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Well, you do anything, so.
Okay. That's how it is. Okay, wonderful.
You said that in the beginning.
That's fine. I can just grab pizza and have one of you guys come here. So what are the use cases? In the software blocking scenario, the use cases of the parents include installing the software, updating controls, removing controls, and of course their own personal internet usage. For the children, the use cases include accessing illegal content as well as illegal content that they're not supposed to be accessing. And remember that it's not up to you to just magically decide the use cases. This is a conversation to have with your interviewer. In some cases, if you're the developer, this conversation would be with your product manager or your, project manager and product management. Some companies have those. Esri has a bunch of those. Any product managers in here? You're a product manager?
I was a long time ago.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I don't know the use of them, but you will tell me later. This is the whole point of this, right? To get educated. I'm not dissing you, David. We've had this conversation before.
He's like, look, it gave me a paycheck.
And just so we know, this is a safe space. You guys are not going to come over here and punch me, so. If you do, we do have David. We know him as an enforcer. So we just do this. If you see me do this and I look at you, you're in trouble. He will take care of you. Okay, step 4. What are the bounds of use? So now that we have the vague use cases defined, we need to figure out what exactly this means. What does it mean for a website to be blocked? Should just the illegal page be blocked, or the entire website? Is the application supposed to learn what is bad content, or is it based on a whitelist or a blacklist? If it's supposed to learn what inappropriate content is, what degree of false positives or false negatives is acceptable? Up to this point, you can program software to be smart and learn and so on, right? But it hasn't reached the point to where it replaces manual testing. Okay, do we understand that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, automation is wonderful. It has its place, its use cases and everything, but again, there's always going to be a need for manual testers, right? There's positions just for testing. So QA testing, give me words, Tony, any words?
QA testing?
I already said that, no. I said new words, not repeat. Point is, testers. We're always going to need testers, right? No, you felt me, Tony. Stop. Okay, testing the function. This is my favorite one. JavaScript developers. Up, and maybe? Okay. Don't be embarrassed. Vash is not here today. So I'm not saying nothing. How many of you guys have written a test suite? Using like Moki or Karma or Jet? Perfect. Okay. I'm going to give you guys a chance to show me something up here in a minute. In many ways, testing the function is the easiest type of testing. I mean, the code's already there, right? You just have to understand the code and figure out what you're going to test and what library you're going to use, okay? And depending on the language, sometimes it's easier than doing it with other languages. The conversation is typically briefer and less vague with your interviewer, and as the testing is usually limited to validating input and output, it's much easier to get by if you really don't know what you're doing, because once you get there, you can look at the code and then kind of talk your way out of it, right? So here, we're going to write some code to test this function on the screen. So the function is called sort, and it takes an array of numbers. So first of all, who wants to volunteer? Guys, too loud, please. One at a time. Are you sure, Spencer?
No, but.
Okay. Okay, so we have this right here, okay? Let me explain it to you first. We have a function called test sort, right? Wonderful. How many of us know what a function does? Okay, for those of us that don't know, can someone explain it? April? Thank you.
No.
Uh,
My brain just said.
somebody. Denny.
You put something in and get something out.
Perfect. Yes, wonderful. And the whole point is that you normally, if you're going to put A into the function, you expect to get the same result every time, right?
Yes.
But then there's a whole talk about pure functions and so on. But the point is, you have a list of instructions. So every time you call that function, those instructions are going to be followed, okay? That's all a function is. So we have a function called test sort, okay? We have a constant called list. It's a variable. Okay? Think of it as a box that's going to hold something. And it's going to hold a new instance of my list, okay? Why don't we just create an array? I think my list is, it has methods that are going to help us with whatever we're going to do, okay?
You're creating a function in a function?
No. This is an instance of something that was built prior, right?
Okay.
And it's called my list.
Got it.
And the list has a method called add3sorted, okay? And it looks, again, I didn't build this code, right? So we're at an interview right now.
Yeah.
And they're asking us, what does this do? I don't know.
Yeah.
So it has a method called add3sorted, and it looks like it takes 3 parameters, right?
Right.
So from the name, because they did a really good job, right? It takes 3 parameters and it's going to sort them, okay? So now I'm going to go ahead and look at what they're doing here to test. They're using a function called assert equals, and they're passing 2 parameters, okay? I believe they're passing the position of the item we're going to test and what it should equal, okay? So now my question is, let's say I'm the interviewer, and I want to see if I should hire you. How do I test the next value in the list to make sure that it's 2, and the last value in the list to make sure that it's 1? Okay, so you can write it here, and write it there. Let's turn around and say,
You guys wanna think about it for a second? I can get it wrong.
I just had to think for things today, for better or worse. So, I guess we look at the next element and we check if it's equal to 2 as it should be. And then we do the same thing on the next element and we check that it's equal to 1. And we want true, right?
okay.
You're saying we want to sell.
No, that's
We
something
haven't
else.
written a function
Yeah,
yet.
you're focusing on this, you did wonderful. So what we would normally do is we look at the code that's already there, right? We don't want to recreate anything, we want to use what's already there. So we saw that they're using assert equals. So we're thinking this is the function they're using to test something, right? And then, no, you were lazy, I already think you're lazy. Okay, and we see that the first parameter is pointing to something within lists, right?
Right.
And we all know that indexes start from?
Here.
Perfect. I think one person knows. No? Okay. Well, wonderful. So we're looking at the first item in the list, which is 3, right? And we want to make sure it's 3. So logically, we're going to think, oh, they're testing to make sure it's 3. Okay? If this returns true, that's going to pass the test, right? So now that they're asking us, how do we test to make sure that this one's 2 and this one's 1?
Right.
So the position of 3 is 0, what would be the position of 2? And what would be the position of 1? Perfect. So where'd it go? Here. So list. So what's the position 1 in the list?
He's comparing it to number 2.
2? Okay, and we're going to compare it to 2. But it's just going to pass, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. What about a position 2 of list? What's in there?
1.
And we're comparing it to 1.
Right.
And it's in the pass, right?
Right.
So would you say that this test would pass? Pass?
Yes.
Not pass, pass.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Now, can I have a volunteer to write, utilizing this example here, to write a test, an invalid sort, to make sure that you write 3 tests that are going to fail?
Like, are you writing a function or?
So yeah, so we have a function called invalid sort.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that if I pass invalid input, it's going to fail, right? These kind of tests also have their place, okay? So we have tests to make sure that valid input does pass,
Right.
but we also have tests to make sure that invalid input doesn't pass,
Right.
okay? So utilizing this right here, you know a couple of things. You know that you can create instances of my list.
Okay.
You know that lists has methods of add 3 sorted, and you know how to check now, assert equals. And now you also know that the first parameter is the value that you compare with the second parameter, right? So now you can write this function. Now we just need to figure out who's going to volunteer. Okay, come on. So you can do one and then you can do the second one. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course, I'm sorry. I thought you were volunteering. Oh.
So, I thought you said that you compare the first value to the second value?
No, I'm partially.
I see you connecting, because you're comparing the values to hard-coded values, right? You're not
Right.
comparing-
So this right here, that's data that we're passing, right?
Oh,
We're,
one, two, three.
yeah, we're assuming, because that's how this is going to be used. They're going to be passing whatever value's in there, but we want to make sure that this is sorted, right? But we're going to assume that whatever parameters we pass into this function is going to sort them, right?
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
They have to fix the values in the list.
we're testing after sorted.
Yeah. Yep, that's what I was thinking. Now, for those of you guys that want to get more practice, a lot of, well, is your hand in first? Perfect. Okay. Outreach, what it does, it connects people from underrepresented groups to different companies to do internships, right? But most importantly is that even if you don't get selected for internships with these companies, what you can do is get started contributing to those companies, okay? So for example, Mozilla is one of those companies. You can get started contributing to Firefox, all the different products that they have. For example, April, what are you working on right now?
Called Pontoon, the language localization.
Wonderful. I don't know what that is. Sounds way too complicated. Okay.
Human. Yeah. I think it's a way for people to translate the website into a native language.
Oh, okay.
So then you can access.
Is that what's using Python?
They're back into it now. I think they're transitioning to React, which is what the ultimate internship will be, because they only listed JavaScript and React. But right now, it's in Django Python.
Okay. Well, what I was going to get to is that they do have a product, which is a DevTool. How many of you guys have used Firefox DevTools?
Oh,
Nobody.
sorry, I have.
Oh, somebody.
They're
What a
bomb,
shame.
actually.
Well, most of you guys use Firefox, these developer tools. But what I was going to get to is that if you want more practice for this, they do need people to write tests for them, okay? For all the different functionalities that Firefox has in DevTools. Okay, so if you guys want to get started, let me know, and I can help you get started with that, okay? I'm trying to make conversation while we're getting this. But nobody started talking to me, so that's fine.
Well, but either way, since we're waiting for her to finish here, like, just I was really hesitant to contribute open source, and then through your help and guidance.
It's easy, right?
I made my first contributions into Mozilla, and what I will say about them as a company is they really, really support new contributors to open source. So they have a whole website that has what they call mentor bugs, And so when you go in there and you ask for it and you ask questions, like, they're really good at answering, they're very kind, and they'll give you, like, not only the answer, but the why, so you can research it further to figure out why that was the answer. It's really a great experience. So even if you're not doing outreach or whatever, I highly recommend you, like, look at Mozilla as an open source option.
That's a good one. No, I was like, because you wrote ass, and I'm like, oh, that's funny. That's all I'm not for. Oh, no.
That's all right.
I will not next time.
I wanted to bring up something though, actually,
Okay.
because, if you have.
Yeah, I'm a kid, guys, I'm sorry.
No, that your interview with the butthead came out? Okay, now I can't see that, but, because actually, if you did a certain not equals in that line, that may not necessarily be right, because one may be in the right place, but the other two may be mixed up as is the case with the second one.
Right, so you can approach this utilizing what's already there and passing incorrect input here too, right? So you know what's supposed to go in here, so you can pass erroneous input and then make sure it fails.
Oh, okay.
Right? Yeah. So how can we do that?
Okay, so on that note, then you could probably still do what you're doing.
Yep.
And as long as one case fails and the whole thing fails, basically, or something?
I would make all of them fail.
Okay.
We want to make sure that any erroneous input that we pass in is going to fail.
Okay.
Right? And we know that as long as these two don't match, it's erroneous. How many of you guys have actually been to like whiteboard interviews? Two people? Okay. They're wonderful.
Hold on.
You saw my body like froze, so that was my brain immediately emptied. I think what threw me off was when it said invalid stored. I thought it was ready to function, not the test. Like when you, I was like.
Oh, it's the way you do it. Okay, that works too. You know, clever you. Okay, I got it. Okay. So what Robin's doing is something. She's using certain not equals. Some libraries do have that method, and it's checking. Instead of checking to make sure that it's true, it's checking to make sure that it's false. That it doesn't parameter 1 doesn't equal parameter 2, right? So she's making sure that this parameter doesn't equal this parameter that she's passing. So when she looks at list position 0, it will be 2, right? And when you compare it to 3, it's not the same thing, right? Perfect. So this is going to pass. So instead of her checking if whatever invalid sort returns is false, and that's the correct thing, she's going to make sure that all these tests pass. And that's how she knows that this test case is passing. Right? Does that make sense? Yes, I'll take that as a yes.
Yes, sir.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Andy. I know it doesn't make sense to you, Andy. Okay, cool. So, testing the function. You would define the test cases, right? There's a couple of different test cases. There's normal, extremes, nulls and an invalid input, and strange input, right? Think about when you're creating a form, for example, right? You have a name input, you have a telephone number input, and for some reason people want to play with you and input characters that don't go into a phone number. So what do?
You put a, what do you mean, to test for that or to
Yeah,
fix that?
to validate that input.
You would write a test that checks for non-numericals and hyphens to see if they're present. And
So
then-
you would approach it utilizing exclusion,
Correct.
right? Okay.
You could like write a function that returns false if you put in something that's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0.
So anything that's not alphanumeric then, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So there's a lot of different approaches, right? So Scott's even talking about going as far as the number of digits that are passed in, right? So Now, let's say as a tester, I go in and I looked at, for example, Scott's approach. I could be a smart ass and say, oh, but it's not just U.S. numbers. What about international numbers? Go back to work. That'd be wonderful, right? So,
Why you hate testers?
when did you get started? Yeah. No, I don't. I don't. We're on video too. Thank you, April. She's positioning me to say things I'm not supposed to.
Once again, I am just repeating words that you said.
Uh-huh, yeah, yeah. In different tones too. You hate testers? Okay, so define the expected results, okay? We talked about what we expected as a result, right? We looked at the list and we said, it's sorted, we need to match it to this. We talked about the position. Yes? No?
Yes, yes,
Okay. Yes?
yes.
I don't think it's a yes. Yes. Is it a yes? Yes. No? I love how you're looking at me. You're like, he's not looking at me. Okay, wonderful. That's fine. Okay, here. Let's go over these 4 different test cases. Okay? The normal case. Does it generate correct output for typical inputs? Remember to think about potential issues here. For example, because sorting often requires some sort of partitioning, it's reasonable to think that the algorithm might fail on arrays with odd numbers of elements. So what's talked about is that even though the implementation may be correct, maybe your sorting algorithm is going to fail. So that needs to be tested as well, right? Again, for example, Mozilla. Every time a new feature is added, we test for the input, we test for any functions that were created to make sure that it returns the correct output. So if, for example, I'm gonna go from personal experience again. I was working on this searching feature, and for every feature that I added into that functionality, like let's say searching and making sure that it matches the case, for example. If I pass in all capital letters, I need to make sure that the output is the correct output. So I created mock input and mock output, and I had to make sure that all the functionality was spitting out what I expected it to spit out, right? So we're talking about defining the expected results, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Writing test code, that's the final step. After you've gone through step 1 and step 2, you're ready to write the test, right? You first need to understand the problem to be able to approach it, right? That makes sense, right? Okay. Please ask questions, guys, if you, because this is all theoretical, right? I'm not teaching you guys how to code, I'm not teaching you anything. It's more a discussion of how we approach tests, okay? You guys could have Googled this and be done in like 5 minutes, so, no, not really. Okay, troubleshooting questions. And remember, we said there's 4 types of testing questions, right? This type of question is about explaining how you would debug or troubleshoot an existing issue. Many candidates, they balk at a question like this, giving unrealistic answers like, just reinstall the software. That's probably what I would do too. I would just reinstall everything. Or like most Windows people do, just turn it off and turn it on, right? So, and it usually works. It honestly usually works. So, but again, like everything else, you can approach everything in a structured manner, right?
Yeah.
One thing that I do, and it's very helpful, is once you have intimate knowledge of whatever you're working on, any project that you're working on, it's almost like you're a doctor, right? They give you the symptoms of what's going on with the application, and you're like, oh, maybe it could be this, maybe it's the Nginx server, maybe it's the firewall, maybe it's this, and you start approaching those different solutions that you have, right? Until you get out of like 4 or 5 solutions you have in your mind, you get to like that second to last one. Now you start to worry, you're like, oh, maybe I don't know what I'm doing, right?
I don't know what that feels like.
But I know how that feels like. I got to like the last one, and I'm like, oh Lord, I'm gonna go back to construction. I don't think
I'm like in the middle of the ocean and I got no landmarks. I don't know which direction
it's horrible. Yeah, but I mean.
When you have to actually go ask somebody for help.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, but it's wonderful. Okay. Story time. So, how many of you guys know who Esri is? Company in Redlands, right? They have 4,500 people and they only have 1 Nginx person. And that Nginx person says, I remember sending him a message and it said, hey, somebody told me that you're very good with Nginx. And he's like, whoever told you that needs to hurt. Because he doesn't like Nginx, right? So we don't have an Nginx specialist. And I thought myself I was really good at Nginx, and I had this issue that wasn't going anywhere. and I spent a long time trying to fix it. In my back pocket, I had like 8 different solutions, and I tried one by one, and none of them worked. Okay, so I reached out to another team and I said, hey team, what's going on? This is not working. I need some help. Okay, it turned out at the end of the day that, I mean, it was still my fault, but how many of you guys know what load balancing is? Okay, so we have one server where the application is, and another server that is a copy of it, right? So we distribute the load between those two VMs, right? Virtual machines.
Yeah.
The problem is that because of our setup, we were only running on one machine. And to my knowledge, we only had one machine up. However, they had both machines up. So all the code that I was sending to the machine that I thought was up was actually not going there. It was going to the one that was disconnected, right? Because they have what's called Jenkins. Whenever we push code to, for example, CodeHub, which is what we call our on-premise GitHub, it sends everything to the VM, right? And from the VMs, it goes from this copy to that copy and so on. So, was it my fault? Yeah, I should have asked that question more. Well, I did ask that question. Let's not get started there. Point is that I tried all my solutions. So what would you do in that case? When it's not really something that is in your, I guess, your court, but then you find out that it was somebody else's thing. What would you do there? What?
Ask someone for help.
Of course, right. But how can you avoid those things where it's like out of your control, really?
Test your code.
What happened? Anyways, let's assume they said ask questions. Hey, wonderful, good job. You ask questions,
Yeah.
right? I remember that week I was very opposite of happy. And we had a talk here at IESD, and I said, whenever you feel in your gut that you know something's not right, just keep asking questions,
Yeah.
right? Because I asked one time, they said no. I asked the second time, it can't be. I should have asked 3, 4, 5 times until they checked that VM was off, right? But I gave up like second, third time. So it was my fault. Anyways, troubleshooting, wonderful. So this type of question is about explaining how you would debug or troubleshoot an existing issue. Are we looking at the same thing? Yes, we are. Many candidates balk at a question. I did read this already.
We did.
Come on, guys. Oh, man.
It would be rude to interrupt you.
Now we have manners. Okay. So you're working on the Google Chrome team. You got accepted into Google. Ooh, look at that. And you receive a bug report. Not you, Andy. No. But we haven't played ping pong yet.
Ping pong table.
I want you to know I have an issue with Andy. He never lets me win at ping pong. So Chrome crashes on launch. What will you do?
You install the software.
We're done. We didn't learn anything. Thank you, God. Okay, so troubleshooting questions. So, number 1. Oh, you said that because we haven't learned this yet, right? Wonderful. So understand the scenario, right? So the first thing you should do is ask questions to understand as much about the situation as possible. And this applies to software that you're developing as well. Let's say you go and start contributing to Mozilla. You need to understand the code base first. You're not just going to jump in and all of a sudden you're a genius that starts creating features, right? You need to understand what's already there. So you can ask questions like, how long has the user been experiencing this issue? Maybe they did a deploy last Monday, and you find out that it started Monday. So now you can go back to that deploy, look at all the code that was pushed out that Monday, and you might find the problem there, right? What version of the browser is it? What operating system? Does the issue happen consistently, or how often does it happen? When does it happen? It's like you're a doctor pretty much, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. No, Andy. Okay, step 2. Break down the problem. How will we break down that problem?
Well, remember you have your scenario, you're going to go back and kind of start it the easiest, like let's start with the most like resetting the computer, does that help it? No, then
Okay.
go to the next.
So you would attack like
Prioritize your scenarios
Okay.
in the way that would make the most sense to kind of go through the.
That's what it looks like. Actually, good job. So now that you understand the details of the scenario, you want to break down the problem into testable units, right? Wonderful job.
That's what I was trying to say.
Can you do this now? 'Cause, in this case, you can imagine the flow of the situation as follows. Okay, you go to the Windows Start menu. How many of you guys use Windows to begin with?
I have used it.
How many of you guys use Mac? Okay, you're okay. Click on the Chrome icon. You know what? I'm not going to torture the Mac people with this, because this is Windows specific. Pretty much what we're going through is we're going through all the steps to try to replicate the issue, right? That's the first thing that we should always try to do, replicate the issue, see what happens when you try to replicate the issue. That way you can pinpoint when it happens, why it happens, and try to fix it that way, right? Or like
Doesn't that also help you to see if it's a local issue? Like
Right.
if it's something within the setup of their system?
Sometimes, most of the times, in my experience, it's a user issue. They're the issue. I can't fix them.
Isn't that usually?
Usually. Those are easy issues though. You just send an email and say, I can't fix them. I've done that before. My project manager was not happy. Third step, create specific and manageable tests, right? Each of the above components should have realistic instructions, things that you can ask the user to do, or things that you can do yourself, such as replicating steps on your own machine. In the real world, you'll be dealing with customers, and you can't tell them what to do, to be honest. I don't even have to read that anymore. You can't, right? You're never going to deal with people that are very good with technology all the time. Sometimes you do, and you love those stakeholders. Those are people that you want to deal with all the time. However, you have stakeholders, people that are managing, not managing, but they kind of control the direction of the project, and you tell them, do this, they'll break it, okay? So you need to give them specific instructions that they can follow, or just do them yourself. Okay, does that make any sense? Okay, perfect. Okay, this part is more about, again, it's all theoretical, but this is more about how you approach and the key concept that interviewers are trying to get out of the questions that they're asking you. So testing questions usually seem like they're just about coming up with an extensive list of test cases, but in addition to that, there are other key concepts that interviewers are testing you for, okay? And these are big picture understanding, right? Knowing how the pieces fit together, organization, and practicality, okay? I can't imagine them telling you, hey, so our search feature doesn't work on our site, and then you tell them, oh, let's switch languages, switch frameworks. Why, right? That's not practical, right? There we go. Big picture understanding. Are you a person who understands what the software is really about? Can you prioritize test cases properly? You're going to create test cases for things that matter, right? You're not going to test, hey, does the application open, right? Do we understand that?
Yeah.
We're going to prioritize, right? Perfect. So for example, suppose you're asked to test an e-commerce system like Amazon. It's great to make sure that the product images appear in the right place, but it's even more important that payments work reliably. Products are added to the shipment queue and customers are never double charged. Right? So do we understand the importance there?
Right.
Okay. I mean, it would be nice to test that the pictures appear. That's more of a backlog item, meaning as soon as things get slow, you can go back and add that additional feature. That'd be wonderful. There's libraries that do just that. Knowing how the pieces fit together. So in essence, do you understand how software works and how it might fit into the greater ecosystem? Okay? So think about something like G Suite. It has a bunch of different applications, right? And there might be an issue with one, and you fix that feature, but now you have to think about integration with the other applications in the suite, right? Perfect. So, and I think that's the thing here. Suppose you're asked to test Google Spreadsheets. It's important that you test opening, saving, and editing documents, but Google Spreadsheets is part of a larger ecosystem. So you need to test integration with Gmail, with plugins, and with other components, right? So it's a whole thing. It's not just one specific item. You need to think outside the box, right? Organization. Do you approach the problem in a structured manner, or do you just spout off anything that comes to your head? Okay? One issue that I've seen with interviewing people is that, I mean, first of all, we're all nervous at interviews, right? Who here isn't nervous at an interview? You're not nervous at an interview? But you don't want to talk in front of these people. That's wonderful. That's great.
If just an interview, I'm fine, but a technical one, yeah.
Yeah. Point is, you're nervous, all of a sudden you start talking fast, you forget what you're talking about, and then it's a mess. They start spouting off solutions that they think are going to solve a problem, and then tech work that they think makes sense, and they have nothing to do with the situation, right? So some candidates, when asked to come up with test cases for a camera, will just state anything and everything that comes to their head. A good candidate will break down the parts into categories by taking photos, image management, settings, and so on. This structured approach will also help you do a more thorough job creating the test cases, right? So you break things down, just like this looks like. April, you're doing this talk next time. Practicality. Can you actually create reasonable testing plans? Right, we talked about practicality. For example, if a user reports that the software crashes when they open a specific image, and you just tell them to reinstall the software, that's typically not very practical, right? Your testing plan needs to be feasible and realistic for companies to implement. Not only that, you're not going to hide the symptoms. You want to make sure you figure out what the problem is. Just because you're not getting an error anymore doesn't mean that the problem is solved, right? So, interview question for everyone. How would you load test a web page without using any test tools? So again, the question is, how would you load test a web page without using any test tools? So again, we just went through a bunch of steps, and everyone said, yes, we get it. Okay?
I mean, without using any test tools, I mean,
Remember those steps. What do you do
my
first?
first step would be to open the web page and see
Right.
what it was.
Ask questions.
Thank
Ask
you.
questions.
Look at that. You just heard him say it first, yeah.
No, I did it.
No, you don't get that.
Come on, man.
So you ask questions, right? What would you do next?
Ask more questions.
Well, depending on the answers to the question.
So depending on the answer, perfect. Okay? So it all starts with that first step, asking questions, right? So you want to know the symptoms, why does it happen, when does it happen, where, everything,
Yeah.
right? Then you can build your, I guess, attack plan off of that, your strategy to approach it, okay? Any questions on what we talked about today?
That's a pretty specific question though, I mean, there's not really a lot of room for interpretation.
Not necessarily.
No.
I mean, you want to know, are you looking at it from a user's point of view? You want to, I mean, like, these are the questions you would ask, I would think. Like,
So it's asking you, how would you load test a web page? So for example, one thing you can do, because you don't have any tools, right? But let's say you do have, when it says you don't have any tools, you don't have tools for that specific test.
Right.
But you can create multiple threads and have those act like users, right? And have those visit the site, right?
Right.
Now you're stress testing. You have, let's say, 1,000 concurrent users, and it fails at 100 users. Well, you need to fix the site, right? So that's one kind of test you can do. For example, Chrome has some tools as well that you can do. Firefox, let's not go too far. We have the profiler, right? You load up a site and it gives you a bunch of different things that you can look at. So, yeah. Anything else? No questions? Everyone got it? So how would you test the pen?
Play with it.
Play with it, okay. So he's getting
Find
familiar with the
anything
code
favorite?
base kind of thing.
Define what it's for.
Okay, perfect. So ask more questions. Okay. Anything else? Andy?
Outsource it to the media.
Outsource it somewhere else. That's one approach, okay. No, all the answers are good. Okay. Well, guys. That's it. So. Just keep in mind that these talks are normally on Wednesdays.
Yes.
It's just that Bass decided he wanted to do his on Wednesday. And I was fine. I was tired Wednesday, so no problem with me. However, what's today? Today's the 5th. 15th, we have Amazon coming out. They're going to be talking about AWS Amplify. Questions?
Isn't there another meetup in here on the 15th at that time?
We already talked about it. the Python group. They're going to be in the break room.
Wait, what is it, Python?
Yep, there's a Python group. Yep. So we also have a Python talk. Is it that same Saturday? No, this Saturday is a WordPress talk with Barry.
Yeah, I mean, the 1 week I'm not gonna make it.
What's it called? Which one? The Python. Python talk is on our meetup page. It is after the WordPress.
It's not the Python
It's like
talk or the
crafting
Python group?
something with Python.
Yeah, it's a long name.
Who's the speaker?
Doug Purcell?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You guys have seen him on Slack.
Yeah, I sent him a message and he never got back.
He's probably waiting till he comes in.
Huh?
He's probably waiting till he comes in and
Yeah.
he can do it. Or he can do someone else.
No, I don't think he's been online.
So, for the Amazon talk, make sure you guys RSVP. It's going to be at 6 to 8. Yes, Jen? No, Jen? Thank you, Jen. 6 to 8. We're going to be giving out free stuff from Amazon, vouchers and whatnot for their services, yeah. And even cooler, she's Amy's friend. She just accepted her position as senior software engineer. She'll be working with Swift. She's been working for Amazon for a long time, but she was a, what do they call them, like tech evangelist kind of thing?
Oh, yeah,
where
yeah.
they go city to city talking about different services that AWS offers. Yeah. And her name's Nikki Stone, so looking forward to that. Any questions? Cool. How many of you guys haven't, no. How many of you guys have not attended a hack day yet? One person. Okay. Try to make it to this one. Okay?
It's fun.
It's fun.
It is fun.
It really is. You have 4 hours, we give you a problem, and then you don't need to know what you're doing, to be honest. You have other team members in there, whatever your skills are, you guys kind of help each other. These guys, believe it or not, won the last one. Yeah, if they can do it, you guys can.
Let them know that they can sit in and shadow.
Yeah, last Saturday of the month.
Let them know that they can sit in and shadow a group. too.
I think you could have told them, Jen. In case you guys don't, you feel kind of nervous to participate, you can also shadow. So you can find a group and just sit and kind of observe what they're doing. Ask questions, that's fine too. So, I think it's easy. I think we're good. So for the rest of the time, guys, there's a lot of pizza left, drinks, so you guys can network, ask questions. There's a ping pong table. Just gotta make sure you beat those guys before they get there. Otherwise, I've heard they stay till midnight.
It's like 1 a.m., okay?
Yeah.
No, where's the key at?
Welcome to the party.